Good morning, everybody. Well, it's morning right now. I don't know when you'll see this video, but I always thank you guys for watching. This is the Will Fix It team, and today this is an '06 model Cadillac SRX, which is a little SUV looking thing, and it's got a V6 3.6 liter. But basically, what we're doing today is just brakes, and we're just going to put pads on the customer requested pads. So I'm just going to give you a little rundown of just several things to do when you're doing this job, and a couple of things to make it a little easier. All right, we'll get started here. Okay, so first things first. And, well, I guess we'll just do this in steps here. But we're going to remove the two caliper retaining bolts. There's one at the top, one at the bottom. This particular model has a 13 millimeter size socket. Removing these two bolts. Now, I've got plenty of place to set the brake caliper up here and not have to worry about it hanging on the brake hose. But if you're in a situation where the caliper doesn't want to lay properly up here and it's going to move because you may have to pull this rotor off if you're changing rotors, then you'd want to use a coat hanger or some kind of little wire and tie it somewhere secure, you know, and make sure that caliper stays put, because you really don't want the caliper hanging by the rubber hose. It's just a big no-no. You know, the rubber hose is not meant to hold that caliper, especially as it ages out. And you know, the hose may be fine for years to come, but if you let it hang, what'll happen is you can break loose the inside of the hose, cause the brakes to start malfunctioning, create a problem that didn't exist prematurely, and that actually falls back on you. The customer is going to say, well, it didn't do that before, and then you say, well, the brake lines are old, and they're going to say, well, you just worked on it. Regardless if the brake lines are old or not, you had your hands in there. So you need to prevent any possibility of something going wrong by just simple things. But this thing should sit up here without any problems. We'll just let it hang around up there. And something that you need to check when you're doing brakes on anything that has these little slide pins, that you need to be like, just check to see if any of them's seized up. Now these are moving pretty free, and I will re-lubricate those, and I'll use a special lubricant that's called brake parts lubricant. I know a lot of you would say, well, just put some grease on it, some wheel bearing grease. Let's see if I can find one here. This one just has a metal stud, but every once in a while you run across one that has a rubber bushing in there. This one does not, but there are vehicles that have a rubber bushing on the end of that. And that rubber and the boot as well are not compatible with the petroleum-based grease. So if you put petroleum-based grease in there, you're going to make this boot swell up. Or if you had the rubber insulator on the end of this slide pin, you would make it swell up and it would start to seize. So when you're doing any kind of greasing on brake parts, you want to use this particular lubricant because it's designed to work with the type of rubbers that are used for this grommet, for the insulator, to keep moisture out. And if it had a little rubber boot on the end of the bolt pin, and that bolt or that rubber that you would see on those is designed to help reduce brake noise. It helps isolate a squeal. Something else that I would like to pass on as well is this customer requested just pads to be installed. Of course, you can see this one metal to metal. There's still enough rotor surface left, and you can get by like that. But as I described to her, even with an ungrooved rotor, if it was just smooth, you can stand a chance of getting a squeal later on down the road, especially on the rear and the light braking, just because of the pads not cutting into the roads. I made that known up front, and she knows this, and so I always recommend replacing the rotors with the brake pads or having them resurfaced. I have a machine that resurfaces rotors. However, typically they get so thin that they just don't hold up. The metal's been so hot. It's hard as a shop to just resurface the rotor and guarantee it not to warp, and then you'd be carrying the labor to redo it if the customer brings it back, even though it was possibly driving habits that caused it. At least with parts places, and you replace stuff at a garage, you can labor claim some of that stuff and recoup some of your losses. So replacing rotors is always recommended. All right, well, let's go ahead, and this one does not have a rear disc or a rear emergency brake incorporated in the caliper. It's actually separate right here and uses the inside of this rotor and some brake shoes to actuate the e-brake. So pressing this caliper back will be just like doing one on the front. You just take a regular clamp. However, I have a little different method. I like to use these welding clamp pliers because they're really fast. I can reach in there and I can squeeze the piston back very quickly, just with minor adjustments, and it just seems a lot easier than using a C-clamp, a little less cumbersome. Now, something I also want you to know when you're pressing these caliper pistons back, you want to make sure that you only have one caliper off when you press the piston back. Because when you're moving that fluid back to the cylinder on the firewall, there's fluid being pressed in a direction. It'll go the easiest path. And if you've got the other caliper off and it's just chilling over there, you'll press all the fluid over to the other caliper and you can create a problem where the piston just pops right out. And now you've ruined the caliper. So always press back your brake calipers one at a time while they're on the vehicle in position. Or better yet, if you have them all off because they're checking the brakes, make sure you use some method of restraining that piston from coming out. So when you do press the pistons back on the caliper, you don't create that problem. All right, so let's go ahead and get to it right quick, guys. Okay, so here's how I've done, and I'll just take this and squeeze it. And now you just, it takes a second, it'll press in. Then I can release it, tighten it up a little bit, clamp, and then until that piston is pressed all the way back. That's how I do that. You can use a C-clamp, and they even make a special little tool like this, but I really like my little weldy pliers. This is a tool that I would use to press that back, and I guess it works. But when I'm rolling through this tool seems to be faster than this right here under most circumstances. Okay, so here's how I've done, and I'll just take this and squeeze it. And now you just, it takes a second, it'll press in. Then I can release it, tighten it up a little bit, clamp, and then until that piston is pressed all the way back. That's how I do that. You can use a C-clamp, and they even make a special little tool like this, but I really like my little weldy pliers. This is a tool that I would use to press that back, and I guess it works. But when I'm rolling through this tool seems to be faster than this right here under most circumstances. Okay, so let's see here. This is the pin, and my method of doing this, let's see if I can set the phone where it can still record. Okay. All right. It's just using this brush, and I don't really like to stick it all in the hole of that because the clearance is kind of tight. This is all you want to do. You want to just kind of coat this thing down real good. And you put it in back over here. Just like, oh my gosh, my finger's in the way. All right, you put it in right there. Looks good right there. And being the fact that they weren't seized up, they're moving really freely, we don't need to spend a whole lot of time tearing everything down, brake cleaning everything, because this right here will serve its purpose very well. You guys remember, if you're working by the job, you have to, this work great, but you've got to also spend your time wisely. All right, when you put these back on, you always want to be sure that your boots will seal back over the little part of the bolts that are the pins that go in there. All righty.